Hey, welcome to the Cam and Notice Show. Today, got a good friend of mine and candidate for U.S. Senate with Iowa, Mike Franken, Vice Admiral retired Mike Franken. Hey, Mike, great to have you on the show today.
It's my pleasure, dear sir. Thank you. Very kind to be here. And this is a very pleasing opportunity to take a break from what I'm normally doing.
Good, good. That's the way. That's the way I like to look at it too. This is a break from the
Yeah.
normal work stuff, and because I like to have fun and learn stuff. Uh, as I use really good English when I talk about things. So, uh, yeah, Mike. One of the things I'm curious about is a leadership thought or trait that has kind of been like your go-to. That thing from when you were a JG or even before, if you want. You know, what was that thing that's kind of carried you all the way to this point?
Well, it's JG in the Army, but it's ensign in the Navy. so,
Oh,
so yeah, oh yeah. So but actually, it goes much earlier for me. I worked in my dad's machine shop growing up, but when I was 17, I didn't lie about my age. They asked me if I was born in 1957, and I said yes. So they thought that meant I was 18. I really wasn't. I was still 17. I went to work for a hog kill plant where
hmm.
we butchered 2,500 hogs a day, and I worked hard. I was first in the rendering plant and working solo, working with some other elderly fellas, and then matriculated up, became a lugger at night because I was a jock like you with sports and stuff. And it was, you ate well and you worked hard and you got muscly. But then ultimately I went on the floor and did a few other things. And when I was in college, they asked me, hey, you want to be a foreman to do some specialty work we're doing? And I said, sure. What's my pay? I get a pay raise. I'll do anything for more money. Well, I got a staff of like 40 people. I'm 19 years old. And so that's, some of them were in their 50s and I'm in charge of them. So what I learned in that experience was never do anything never ask someone else to do something you're not willing to do yourself. So on that second day of that leadership challenge, somebody had to hang from a chair against a wall that was covered with mung, against a bulkhead that was covered by mung, to clean it with a high pressure hose. It was dangerous. It was claustrophobic. It was gross as anything in the world. It was probably death-defying in terms of ingesting stuff. And it was a thankless job because nobody could see it. And I got no takers when I said somebody needs to go up there. So I said, okay, that's my job. And after that day, nobody complained about pardon the expression, shittiest jobs that were involved in redoing the rendering plant of that place. So I kind of held that through. I've never asked anybody to work harder than me, to do something that was something that was entirely thankless if I wouldn't do it myself. And I think people recognize that over time.
Yeah, I think especially in that kind of industry, I know in my experience, when you're the leader on the farm, it's very much that there's always that one nastiest job. There's always something that's terrible like that. I know my last job, Cobra Valley, it was really turning the compost was the worst thing, and stuff like that was pretty nasty.
Right.
Sweeping floors, all that kind of stuff. But you can do so much as a leader when you put your hand up for those jobs. And I like that you asked first, because I usually don't do that. I put my hand up and wind up doing the dirty work that I probably could have gotten someone else to do. But it's important. You have to be able to be the person to put your hand up and go in and, pick up the shovel, like you always say, Dad, and go in and do that dirty work. Because like you said, you don't want people to be working harder than you, but you can ask them to work as hard as you are. And I think that's something that's very different. I tie it back to rugby real quick. If you're doing conditioning and you're the captain out there, you really can't be yelling at people to go faster than you. But if you finish, you can stand there at the finish line and yell, hey, hurry up, boys. And that's the big difference right there.
So here's another story. The ambassador in South Sudan said, I really need somebody to talk to the Sudanese People Liberation Army government forces and also the in opposition forces, SPLA IO. And so nobody said, we're not going to do that. I mean, where do you speak to these people in the DMZ in northern South Sudan? Are you kidding me? It's dangerous up there. Plus, you have to get up there, which is a whole nother matter. So
you've been part of those roads, so yeah.
Well, yeah. So and I mean, there is active badness going on up there every day. So it is well, somebody. We were directed by State Department. Somebody needed to do that. And who better than a military person? And who am I going to ask to do that? I'm here. Okay. So in that situation, I had a German lieutenant colonel, peacekeeper, company commander of Mongol soldiers. My small PSD, sorry, that came later.
A Freudian slip, Mike.
A real Freudian. And so, I mean, it's literally in a burned out building talking to the government forces saying, if you don't retreat 5 miles, 3 miles, I will quit paying your soldiers, because the U.S. were paying their soldiers. And knowing that his soldiers are going to turn on him if they don't get paid, and then finding my way 300 yards to the north and talking to the opposition forces underneath a banyan tree, surrounded by their barefooted or shower-footed AK-47 wielding guys of all makes and models, around these shrunken skulls of cattle and gravestones where it's not stones, or piles of stones on top of corpses, some small, some 6 feet long, etc., where people were scraped up and rolled over with rocks on them so the dogs wouldn't dig them up. This environment. And I said to the SPLA IO, listen, if you don't go on the other side of the river, I'm going to give our artillery 105 rounds to him, and he's going to walk you north. So this is what I need you to do. And looking him in the eye and saying, what are you going to do about it? Knowing I'm outgunned. And so, it's just one of those situations. And who's going to do it? Well, a leader's going to do it. It's up to you.
Yeah.
So.
That's funny, because what jumps in my mind is that old adage of sometimes if you act like you know what you're doing, people believe you know what you're doing. Right. So
yeah,
and that was how you influenced them to go do. What do leaders do, right? They influence people to do things sometimes that they don't want to do.
Right. Well, the German guy, interestingly, he took off his combat uniform and put his military blouse on. Carrying his M9, thinking that maybe looking more officious, he would be more conspicuous in his tunic, and he probably was right.
Oh man,
good stories.
That's fun, and that environment up there, and for people that haven't been there, man, it is just. I always refer to it as caustic. And I'm not talking about the people. I'm talking about the physical environment. It is just, that's hardcore living. I mean, and things going on up there. Oh, that's a great story about that, sir. I think that was fun.
So the other thing you learn doing stuff like that, this, Otis, empathy. Mm-hmm. Worried, concern about your fellow humankind. That's a big teaching moment for leadership.
It is.
So what I think that kind of ties into, and it's something we've touched on with a few different people over the course of our now 40 shows, is that we tend to have we tend to kind of fall into, especially us civilians, when we look at conflicts and things, you tend to fall into that good guy bad guy perspective, and that really, from the more I learn, it doesn't serve you. It really doesn't. Because everyone has a reason why they're doing what they're doing. Everyone has their incentives. Everyone everyone has their own motivations, and you have to be able to understand that in order to properly handle those type of situations.
And remember that when we talk about politics.
Yes, sir.
That's right. I mean, you know, my clients, when I'm coaching my clients and they're dealing with the conflict in their team, that's one of the things I talk to them about. So what's their perspective? What's a different way you can look at this problem? And you start to see all kinds of different solutions start to come out.
Yeah. Perspective is everything.
It is. It is. You know, I'm curious, you know, Army guy, why the Navy? Why'd you go into the Navy, Mike? What was a farm boy from Iowa that goes out into the big blue ocean? What happened?
Well, everybody's got this saga of nothing's planned, right? So my mom was a one-room schoolhouse teacher. I'm the youngest of 9. She made us do reasonably well in school. So I was going to go to medical school, and my brother, who got drafted, was on the cusp of getting drafted for Vietnam, 1963, much older. He became a pilot, went from E1 to 06 as a pilot, and was a hot rock pilot, you know, driving a BMW car and a Moto Guzzi motorcycle, and had a nice wife and had a happy life. And he said, you know, go to medical school at the age of 28, see the world, have a good time. And so, I mean, it was a slap on the table saying, great, you tell mom. And so I didn't want to be in the Navy. My dad was in the Navy. My grandfather was in the Army. I had a brother-in-law who was in the Air Force. He lived a pretty good life. Another brother-in-law who had his foot shot off in the Marine Corps in Vietnam. That didn't look too appealing. And another brother-in-law was a doctor in the Army, and living in Pearl Harbor. He was just distant. And so I said, you know, Air Force. So I called the Air Force people. They didn't answer. So I Rolodexed to Navy. They answered. That's why I ended up in the Navy. It's as simple as that.
I love those stories. It's you know, the guy who goes to the, you know, the storefront where the recruiter's office is, and is like, you knock, they don't answer, you go to the next one. Okay, that's what I'm doing.
Right. Yeah. So it's okay.
So
tell me about your. Go ahead, Camden.
So Mike, I was going to say, what was the big driving factor that led you to serve your country? Was there some big ideal or anything like that? And then how is that held out over the course of your life, and then now getting into the political sphere?
Well, I mean, I think everybody has a particular personality trait that they become servers to their fellow humankind. They like to be helpful. They do like to go it alone, but as long as what they're doing alone is helpful to others. So I think there's a strong element of that you feel like you're doing something of purpose, and it may not be financially most rewarding. It may be a lot of sacrifice associated with it. I think I was gone from home for well over a decade during my career. You know, it's just what you do. I don't think about it being overly dangerous as much as a lot of things. I mean, I'm a risk taker in that regard. That kind of propels me. So I think it's just mostly I wanted to do something of substance, and I was younger. I was the youngest of 9, and I saw the most interesting time of my elder siblings' life were when they were giving back. So once I got in the Navy and figured out, you know, how to salute and do all that business, never did learn how to march. Wasn't important in the Navy. Once I got in, I mean, I thought about getting out a couple of times and go to medical school. I thought about getting out a couple of times and doing some more comfortable existence. But I never got out until it became more of a morality issue to go decide to do something else. A struggle of conscience. So.
I'm letting that one soak in for a second because, you know, everybody has their own little things that drive them towards them, but that fate of conscious, I think, is that what you said? Fate of conscious, right? Is that how you
Well,
put it?
yeah, it's so, I mean, you don't have to be 100% for anything, uh, but you have to be obliged to do it. But when you've got a fault of logic of conscience, then it takes it to a different realm. So I planned the Navy's participation for the invasion of Iraq. I had no issues with that. Matter of fact, I enjoyed that very much. I mean, I was a planner, and that was good. But then when it was time to vote, should we invade Iraq? I said, this is a bad idea. But I was overruled. But I'm okay with that. Okay, well, I'm all in. Then let's go. Let's go with it.
Mhm.
And I'll never say I told you so, no matter how it works out. But ultimately, when I needed to follow somebody and be smitten with that person through thick or thin, knowing that some of the decisions are going to be right, some of them were going to be less than right, I came to the conclusion of life that the largest proportion of that person's decisions were going to be less than right. And I decided that I had an error of consciousness, and it was time to move on. It's okay.
Well,
Everybody has a choice.
well, that makes me think of something. You kind of mentioned it, and it was a question I had in my mind. Is who do you model yourself out of, or when you look and study history, or even just somebody and you say, man, I want to be a leader like that person. So do you have somebody that or a group, your top three
Well,
maybe even?
sure. I think we all would like to emulate aspects of leadership in people, like Lincoln-esque. I really think it's great that he had to sneak his way into Washington D.C. and come via the long way around Maryland, because he was always reasonably concerned about getting offed. And I mean, so I think that's significant. How he worked things behind the scene and never looked to be in front of the camera. I mean, I think that's highly laudable. There are others. My father was a rough-hewn fella, blue-collar worker, big like you, and he always was very forthright, and you reached a point with him, and he snapped, and that was the end of it. You better know where that point is. Certainly, his kid working in the machine shop with him, and I never wanted to get close to that. But I saw him in other situations where Big Joe stood up, and there was no mistake about it. And everybody knew that he was honest as the day's long, and he stood up, and he had no issues in saying, "Okay, you, let's go." And it was that type of leadership. There's a remarkable number of others. Here's the big thing about leadership. Some of our best leaders and the stories behind them never get told. And because they either shrug it off, or they don't survive, or others don't survive and they do, but they'll never say a word about it. So I think every day is a challenge of leadership, and just to kind of be first, be there, be complete, and be honest.
I think it's something as a leader, to take a quote, if you do something right, people won't be sure you've done anything at all. And that if you take that mindset as a leader and you kind of, like you said, be behind the camera and be okay like that and have that kind of sort of quiet confidence, I think that can take people so much further than being the person who's always the loud mouth trying to get everyone up and going. You can just sit there, be quiet, let people go about their business, and then when it's time to say something.
Yeah. Agreed, Camden. Yep.
You have something else, Kim?
Oh, no, I was waiting for you.
Oh, okay. No, I think that's a great point in how to develop that, and what, as you we've talked a lot about leadership. So what I'm really curious about, well, really, I'm gonna ask this one first. I'm gonna save the next one. But favorite job, you know, from machinist to, you know, running for Senate.
You never know what's going to be the good job until you get into it. So I had an opportunity after a long seed job where it was arduous as can be, multiple deployments, et cetera. And Navy dangled in front of me a second time to go get another master's degree. And this was going to be not a degree in physics. This was going to be something a lot easier. This was going to be, you know, national security affairs or something like that. And I was really down on it. I said, yeah, absolutely. Can't wait. And I got a phone call and it was, son, you ain't going to that school. One of those conversations. You're going to hightail over here and I got a job for you on the waterfront. And I was like, I can't believe. And my wife was like, great, there you go again, you know, 20-hour days. But I worked for a fella who, and I had a small team of huge professionals that ran the combat systems on the destroyers and frigates on the Norfolk waterfront. And it turned out to be a fabulous job of management experience, long-range thinking, cost-benefit analysis, decision-making, going to buy. And never once did I go to my boss and he said, well, one time he said, well, is this something you want to do, Mike? Because you're going to develop some enemies. And I said, this is the right thing to do. In the end, this will turn out well. He says, oh, okay. And so my small cadre of senior enlisted people and myself, it would turn out to be the best job of all. Of all my jobs that I thought were going to be absolutely the worst. So you never know. You make the job, and the people around you help you make that job into something you want. And being the leader above and below makes all the difference in the world.
That's great, because, you know, I went to, when I was at Sakier, I had that same feeling. It's like, you know, another NUG staff job, just kind of ride my time out to retirement sort of thing. And then Admiral McRaven came in and we started building the NATO headquarters, NATO SOF headquarters. And man, that job, it was unbelievable. It was those little things that you just make. If you make the best of what you got, then it becomes the best of what you got, right? I mean, it's just, you can complain about it or you can make the best of it. And that's a great.
If your job is confined, but it's not building your empire, it is building your responsibilities and the necessities of what you're doing to interpret where you can go with this, taking it to the next level. That makes it rewarding because everybody wants to be value added. I mean, you truly want to be value added. And so when afforded to do that by expansive leadership, it's a fabulous eventuality.
Yeah, well, the value added, you know, I do a lot of the team building stuff, and that is such a critical piece that, you know, whatever it is that I do, and, you know, there's stories about, and I draw a blank on the name, but, you know, the janitor in the hospital that knows if he keeps the floor clean, by keeping the floor clean, it keeps the rate of infection down, and it helps people get better faster and sooner. So even, I mean, the entire team has to understand that.
Right.
That value added to the purpose of the team.
Right.
Yeah, and I think that when you have a team that understands the greater purpose that you're looking at, you know, like you said, the people make the job, and that's what it really comes down to. When everyone's kind of working towards that common goal, you get so much more out of each person, and they add so much more value to what the team's doing. You know, I could think of so many different things inside rugby as far as it goes, but just especially as a forward inside rugby, there's eight big sweaty guys. They're doing all the nasty jobs and doing all the heavy lifting and all that kind of stuff. But you know, you're doing something that's helping the team. And that's the attitude you have to have. One of my favorite stories I like to tell is old coach, a good friend of ours, John Patterson. I got my first varsity game in high school, and he told me he never wanted to see my face during the game because my job was to hit every single ruck and go do all the dirty work. And if he never saw my face, I was doing my job right. And that just completely flipped my perspective because I was realizing I'm not going to score. I was even skinnier than I am now. I was playing with a lot of guys that are a lot bigger than me. I was never going to score. I was never going to break a tackle. I wasn't going to be the big all-star player. But I could go find my job, do that job as well as I could, and that provided the impact for the other 14 guys on the field for us to be successful.
Yeah. Value added. Right.
So what I'm curious about, when you get to the Senate, and I'm on that optimistic side for you because we're gonna, when you get to the Senate, that's a whole nother world of leadership. And I'm curious, as you envision that, how do you do that? How do you I guess really sustain upon your values in this realm of 99 other people you're going to be working with?
Well, I it's the sport may be the same, but the game's a little different. So for this game, like with every other, get the big strategy right. There's some truisms of life. The strategies don't get better with time, and events don't usually work in your advantage if you haven't done the necessary preparation. So I would make sure the strategy of my office and how people thought about the problem set before us. What do we want to do? What are the big pearls of accomplishment? Our citizenry in the state of Iowa, the nation as a whole, internal from border to border, and then the United States in the larger globe for the betterment of humankind. And so kind of working out. It's not about my family. It's not about the circle of my family, but let's just work on our little core and then expand it from there. So knowing what the goalposts are in each of those areas and starting locally and expanding that and letting the natural course of things take their place and always holding true to a couple of truisms. You got to be there. You got to, and you don't need to be there first, but you need to be there towards the front of the line often. You need to be a complete person, being prepared, and you need to be honest with yourself, honest with those who elected you, and transparent with where you're headed. And ultimately, and don't surround people who think like you. You want dissension on the team. And when you reach an accommodation for a decision, you want to say, okay, let's decide to do this. And iteratively, let's be introspective. Let's look at ourselves and then look from outside in, and let's carry forth and tarry forth. And ultimately, I found that to be hugely effective. This is what we did. On a ship, you've got what are called special evolutions. Getting refueling at sea, pulling into port, getting underway from port, doing a missile shoot, doing a large gun exercise, doing a tomahawk shoot, etc. The thing to do after that is to compel people to be part of the team, and where you're using a Dr. Demingism of continuous improvement, not only in the product but also in your leadership. So you bring the whole team together. There may be 30 of you, from the 18-year-old just got on board who had a key phone talking role to the captain who's making the decision, go, don't go, what's this, don't do that, et cetera, to the weapons officer who's actually running all the systems. And okay, everybody, grade yourself. How did we do? Where did we fail? What did we do well? for the failures and the less than completes, who's responsible for fixing each one, when, how, with what assets. And does everybody generally agree with that? Okay, so we're going to revisit this when, with what results, leaving nothing to chance, and then you go to the next person, and then you go to the next person. Everybody has value added. And ultimately, the mundane, you don't even talk about. The difficult becomes mundane. The impossible becomes intimately or infinitely doable. And you become a good ship.
I think largely a lot of that, as you're talking about, you know, well, you want to include the entire team. And the reason why that has to be so important in, you know, so many different situations is it kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier, perspective. That each one of those individuals has a different perspective on what was going on, about what the output was, what their job was leading up to it, and how they can improve on that situation. And without tapping into every individual like that, you're going to have issues. You know, if you have someone, I'm going back to rugby again, sorry, but if you have somebody in a scrum in rugby, you got 8 guys pushing together, and if one of them knows what's wrong, because if it doesn't feel right, it's not right. That's how it goes. You know, it's a hard thing to do, but you know, it feels right when you're doing it right. And one of the biggest things you have to do as a coach is teach the players to turn and talk to each other instead of going over to me and say, hey, Coach Cam, it didn't work. Can you watch? Can you see if my position was right? It's like, well, go turn to the guy next to you and say, hey, we need to get our bind tighter. We need to get our shoulders lower, whatever the situation is, because you can feel if it's wrong because you're the person in the scrum, not me. And they have the perspective to do that properly. And I think that applies to any sort of team situation because everyone has their own incentives. Everyone has their own perspective. And you have to be able to, as a leader, utilize that in order to get the best product possible and add as much value as possible.
Perfect. Yeah. Perfect.
I want to throw something at you that I was just thinking about. So we had Pastor Bob on a few shows ago, and I like to bring things back to the business sense too. And you think about the church and how the church is a business and things like that. What you're doing right now, running a campaign, is a really interesting business. And I'm just curious how you define things. You know, you have your team. That's pretty, you know, everybody I think understands that. But when we talk about profit and loss and we talk about clients and things like that, how do you define that at this point in your campaign, if you will?
It's funny that you used Otis. It's funny that you use religion as the preemptive conversation to this, because there again, you have real property. You have a loss organization, meaning you've got salaries, you've got real estate, you've got rents, you've got programs. There's all sorts of associated costs of running this. And the big issue is you need to pay salary. And but what's your product? Your product is a future that's reasonably incomprehensible. Oftentimes, if you're a first-time politician, you don't have any track history of doing this. I'm a little different. I had worked on the Hill before many times. I got a long, so I'm getting the call from my boss here. But the interesting thing is, so you have a promise, and you've got to perform. So you've developed the most crucial thing for any business, and that's trust. They have to trust in you. And they have to believe that, they don't have to believe in you, they just have to believe in their trust of you. That ultimately, when asked to, you'll provide the necessary guidance. You'll stay true to yourself. You'll stay true to that which brought you here. Here's a story. I get a phone call. I'm outside of Clinton, Iowa, and a very thick German accent says, "Admiral, when you get into the Hill, will you hold to your military precepts?" And I said, "I think I will. That's all I know. I'm a 60-plus-year-old guy. I've never really fallen off that before. I don't need this job. I'm doing this out of service. I anticipate I will. Then I will help you." and it was like, I don't know what that means. And well, he was the chief technology officer of a really big U.S. corporation who was upset that people such as you and I, who we use the fact that we've got military leadership to get to where we are in the world. And yet, once we get there, we act like, we don't know what we're talking about. You know, we kind of fall off that gilded path. And he was upset about it. He was looking for someone who would hold to. And I guess I convinced him I would.
Awesome. Cam.
Yeah. So, Mike, when we were doing reading up on you beforehand, one of the things that stood out for me with my agricultural background was you wanted to modernize Iowa's agriculture to fight climate change. And so I was just curious because I always love to talk about the future of agriculture and where the industry is going and all this kind of stuff. What are some key pieces or factors you see in that path forward for Iowa's agricultural industry?
Well, you know, it's just like this South Sudan struggle that you've got a lot of entities that are working against you, and you best not try go it alone. So if we use agriculture as it exists today, which is a manifestation of where we've come for the last 80 years, now controlled by some large agricultural consortiums, almost near oligarchs of sorts, and how the owner-operator farm has mutated into sometimes an owner really using his or her farm as a steward of some larger entity. It's different. But what we've also done with the production of ethanol and other things, where Iowa used to create all sorts of crops. It was the breadbasket of America, apples and wheat and flax and all sorts of stuff were grown here. Now today it's generally corn and beans. That's it. Because that's what big ag kind of wants us to do. Well, when we've done that, we've taken a lot of the localized production out of that operation, where a local storage facility and drying facility may employ 15 people, but encompasses land 100,000 acres around them. And so you're not employing a lot of people, and they're mostly blue collar workers, and you don't have the wage scale. We've kind of fallen off the wealth of farming today. The wealth of farming is downtown New York or Minneapolis or Boston, or Beijing. And it's not in the farmer anymore. And sometimes if you talk to a farmer today, you say, hey, where's your profit? Where's your profit and loss? How much say-so do you have in your profit and loss? Some of them will say, I have very little. I could be the best farmer in the world. It doesn't make any difference because the markets control my life. And they don't want that. So ultimately, you can't have an agricultural situation where you've got a farmer who's growing corn for ethanol versus big oil, because they'll always lose. They'll always lose. So my sense is farming needs to be simpatico with the climate hawks, simpatico with regional food production, more farm to table operations, more efficiencies associated with farming, so that it doesn't become big ag versus ethanol / farming, but rather human consumption food, animals, ecological considerations, climate change, preservation of the family farm, carbon sequestration versus carbon emitting. So you change the game. Let's not play rugby. Let's play multiple sports against one team and see who draws the biggest crowd.
Right. And, I think you touched on something that I got put in the back of my mind a while back when I first got into farming, was the idea that people really want to know their farmer. And it's a little bit of a trend, and, not everyone's there, but it's something I found as I go through studying agricultural business economics and things. And what really led me to creating a business plan that I put in for a nonprofit a couple years ago was that you can solve a lot of this in the traditional farming sense. There's a lot of good that we have in the family farm and those type of things that just kind of need to be kickstarted up into the 21st century, is the way I
Yeah,
always put it to people.
absolutely.
If you look at, so to kind of do a quick overview of what I was talking about, that business model, it was basically that you have a town, you have X number of people inside this town. We know we need to feed those people. We know that each of those people, let's call it, eat a head of lettuce a week and 3 bell peppers. Well, if you can plan out your production to cover that, then you have a market right there, and you're covering there. And then because you're the local farmer, then you have your stewardship of your land, and you have all of the incentives lined up to do everything right, like you're talking
Right.
about.
Right.
If you have a big corporate farm, you don't have the incentives to take care of the land as much. You don't have the incentives to take care of the environment. But if it's your land and you're covering it and you're feeding your town, you have every incentive to do that right. And so I think it's kind of going back to my favorite word is incentives. It's all about aligning those incentives into the proper way. And, when you look at, it's combining the new technologies and all these great things that we're figuring out, and that, hey, the corporate farms figured it out for us. That's great. But how do you apply that in a model that actually makes sense and helps everybody out? And I think you're completely right. The family farms are a big way forward on that.
Yeah. So, Stalin showed that doing something for a larger entity where you were just a stooge in execution didn't work so well.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah. So, I mean, you can boil this down. I'm a science guy, so you can boil this down to the heat equation associated with ethanol and other productions, and how can we better preserve the heat so we can start growing things on localized levels and grow houses, and we can start doing this farm to table operations in an entirely different manner.
Exactly. And there's so many compounding effects. And
Right.
when you come to that, like just the easy one that I always use in my sales pitch with that nonprofit was just like, hey, if I'm growing it down the street, it's me. Even if I'm delivering it to you, that's me in my truck driving half a mile or a mile. That's not it getting shipped across the country. You're getting better food. The consumer's happy. We're not polluting as much. Environment's happy. And I'm still making money. Farmer's happy. You can check all of those boxes. It's not that complicated, right?
Shorter logistics chains are advantageous everywhere. You bet.
So one other question on that before we get out of the ag too much. So something I've noticed here in Arizona, and it's something I've seen in classes and things, is that there's a little bit of this legislative inertia around urban agriculture. Is that something that you see inside Iowa, or because it's more of a farming background in general, is that something that you're not combating as much in that type of area?
Yeah, that's not a big issue here, really. Farming is where most people moved away from in this state.
Hmm.
And what's encouraging is you're seeing people coming back to the family farm, oftentimes after they've had a life as an engineer, a life as a school teacher, or a medical professional, et cetera. And mom and dad or family farm is now up for grabs because people have retired out of it, coming back to the farm. But you don't see a lot of urban agriculture here. But we certainly can. We got the land for it.
That's great.
Well, hey, Mike, I really appreciate your time. So, in our tradition, wrapping up our show,
Yeah.
we always talk about what we learn, and it's my turn to go first, Camden. And your little snippet about the business of politics and the product that you provide is the future. To me, I never thought about that way, and that's such a great synopsis, putting it into an understanding. I think that it's not oversimplified. It's just a great way of thinking about it, because that's why I vote for that guy or that gal, because they said they're going to set these things up and going to do these things. So that's the product they're selling, and that's what I'm buying as the consumer, a voter as the consumer.
Right.
So I thought that was a great one.
Well, the pollution in politics has to do with money. And So what oftentimes gets interpreted as the best politician, and politician means a leader, is the person who accumulates the most money. But that's just the best fundraiser. And although that person may be exceedingly skin deep and ultimately just be a pawn to larger party politics, or to be bought by the financial entities that bought into that person. So why we consider money behind a politician to be this demonstrably positive thing is always a curiosity for me. It's like, why don't we talk to a person second, third? When I worked for Donald Rumsfeld, he always asked, if he had a question on a topic, it went 4 layers deep, always. And you could bet on it. And you better know, because if you didn't know one of those layers, next, he's not going to do it. Off with your head.
What'd you learn, Mike?
Well,
Make Camden go.
Well, I learned that there's a role for leadership and people value it. And I'm glad that people use their life's experiences to provide that to others, because you can short circuit the path of mighty potholes by talking and listening to people such as yourself that have lived it, heard it, and think about it more.
It's all perspective,
right?
So I'm kind of building.
How about you?
I'm kind of building off of yours, Dad, because I took it from the same statement he said, but I took it a different way, actually. So I'm going to go ahead and keep it. Is that really in the business of politics, one of the things you're selling along with the future is the trust. And I really like that, because it kind of like sent a little light bulb off in my head of that's how you get these really big personal connections. You have people that are so, really fanatical with a lot of different politicians, whether it's local or national level, because it's all about trusting that individual to make the right choice in that situation. And I loved the way you talked about that, Mike, because that's really what it comes down to. Like you're talking about that phone call you got. You can't say yes or no to those type of things. Will you hold true to this? Well, it depends.
Right.
Everything depends, right? I love to use my economist answer and cop out on a lot of things. It depends, because I don't know what the situation is going to be. It'll depend, because I'm going to look at all of these different variables. We always talk about it's multivariate problem solving, right, Dad? And you have to trust the person is going to make the right choice in that situation, however they're aligned politically or whatever's going on with that or what their background is. You trust that they will make the right choice with all of the information in front of them. And I think that's what the big difference is.
Perfect. Well, thanks, y'all. Thank you very much. This was a very kind, and I'm glad I could be some value added to it all.
There's value added.
Thanks for taking the time out, Mike. What's the website again? I don't want to mess it up, please.
It's frankenforiowa.org. So Franken for Iowa, just like Frankenstein without the Stein.
Awesome. Hey, thanks again, sir. Camden.
Thank you all.
Thank you all again for listening to today's show. Special thanks to our guest, Mike Franken, and our sponsors, MASH, Military and Athletic Strength Hemp Oil. You can check out recent episodes of The Cam and Otis Show on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. And check out a full archive at thecamandotisshow.buzzsprout.com. The Cam and Otis Show is on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Thanks again. See y'all next week.
See y'all. Bye, y'all. Thank you much.